So I think when most people hear the word notes, at least in the MCAT space, they are thinking they're looking at information and they're writing it down word for word or close to word for word. I think at most maybe some paraphrasing. When you use the word notes, what all does that mean to you?
I mean, I do think there is going to be some repetition of content because your notes are drawing on a certain source. Um, but yeah, in general, I'm not really interested in rewriting what is already there. And some people, I think students in school sometimes get this impression that it's like that's what notes are about, and then some of them are like, okay, that's what notes are about. I'm gonna rewrite, and then some of them are like, oh, this is useless. Why would I do this? Why would I just repeat content again? Um, when I think about notes, I think about grappling with my understanding of the material. Right? Usually, it's not enough just to kind of read the book and think in your head, um, and it's not so much that you know you have to take notes all the time or notes are so critical or important. It's just a nice tool to help you think. That's I think that's kind of how I view them as a way of helping you to engage in the material, and not in the sense of like, oh, this is going to help me pay attention, and if I don't take notes, I'm like my mind will wander, but really as a way of like, am I understanding what's happening? Am I understanding what's going on? And often if you continue to kind of take notes over the course of reading multiple sections and incorporate the stuff that you already know, I mean, you might be linking examples from chemistry class that you had 2 years ago or something, or a physics class or whatever. You might be linking these examples to the notes that you're taking now. That's not in the material. That's not in the book, right? This is kind of your personal kind of thinking garden that is growing over time. And sometimes, I mean, a lot of times for me, like I don't really keep notes. Sometimes I think it is more helpful to keep notes over time and see that knowledge base grow, and you can look things up and everything. But yeah, fundamentally, I view them just as like a tool for thinking with.
So if you are in the middle of taking notes and you look at what you've written, and I'm guessing we can just go ahead and say like if it's word for word what was already written, that's pretty blanket statement, not good notes. Is that fair to
I
say?
mean, I think there. I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm someone that isn't a fan of blanket statements, I guess. But there are cases where I think, okay, this is an important quote, or this is an important definition of which like every word is critical and well chosen, and it must be this way because of XYZ thing. I do think there are some times when it's like, hey, I'm just trying to kind of let's just run through this again in my head, like and maybe it is exactly the same words, but I think those are cases are relatively rare. I think the general case is that if you are just repeating what you have read or heard, then you're kind of that's a sign that you're not really thinking about it, because I mean it's not guaranteed that you're not. It's very easy to get in the mode where you're just transcribing what's being said, and especially when someone's like, "Oh, this is important." Blah 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 is this is a definition for whatever. Oh, okay. Oh, the such and such process. Okay, I'll write down whatever it says. Um, but if what if say there's a description of a certain process and you draw that process out in a flowchart in your notes, like that's indicative of somewhat of an engagement in your thinking. If you add to the examples that are given, even even something as simple as like here's X principle and here's some examples of this principle, and then in your notes, if that structure, that basic structure, it might not be exactly the same words. It shouldn't be the exact same words, but it's like, hey, this is the basic idea, and then these are a couple of memorable examples that illustrate that idea. Like if you have the structure of what of what's been presented to you. I mean, I think that's an indication that you're capturing something.
The structure thing I've heard you talk about a few times, and I feel like I understand it, but I'm not 100% sure. When you talk about like extracting the structure out of information or content, for example, let's take something like chemistry. The periodic table is very built on this concept of valence electrons without getting into it. So when you talk about structure, are you talking about noticing things like that, that the periodic table organization is in a way a subsection of this broader topic of valence electrons and electron orbitals? Is that the type of structure that's in your mind when you mention that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've probably used it in a couple of different ways. You use the term structure in a couple of different ways. One way is like the understanding the structure of the material as it has been presented to you in terms of like, hey, this is principle one, this is principle two, these are examples, this is a procedure, this is a different procedure. And so seeing that like, hey, these two concepts, they're not the same, they're different, right? Or these two like concepts are subcategories of a broader concept, right? Like, and all of that, I mean, usually textbooks or teachers are fairly explicit about that, but students don't always pick up on they'll get confused about the about kind of the overall the way it's been organized in terms of how it's been how it's been presented. I mean, usually teachers and textbooks think a decent amount about how to organize it in a way that makes sense. That's one meaning of what I mean when I say structure. But the other thing, which might be closer to what you're talking about, I don't know, is like as you are collecting concepts and procedures and examples and principles and various ideas and everything, and this includes when you're working on practice problems, right? You're trying to grow your own understanding of this area. And so, yeah, and this happens in little fits and starts and different steps where it's like you might have little insights here and there, or like realizations about, oh, this is actually connected to that, or like this is a completely different environment or a completely different topic, but actually it's the same process, the same basic like 4-step process here that's going on here, that's going on there. And so this is really about organizing what you're understanding in your head, and seeing patterns that maybe are not directly given to you, and maybe aren't even given to you at all. I mean, all of us are intelligent people. We can observe things and learn things on our own. And so, the process of having more general ideas of things, the process of having more elaborate ideas of the understanding of things, more details, more exceptions, more boundary conditions, all of these, this is something that, you just, it's a part of understanding things. And you want to be aiming to do that on your own, to becoming like an independent learner and thinker in that way.
And would those be good things to be taking notes on, writing down, like realizations, restructuring information,
Yes,
relationships?
100%. Yeah. Yeah. I
Okay.
think that's most of the notes that I would take. I mean, I do think there's a little bit of, like if you're taking notes in like a free recall kind of style where, I mean, some of that is just trying to like, okay, like what just happened, what was said, let's remember what I can from all that. But a lot of the notes are comments or connections or realizations, or even moments of surprise, like, whoa, this, like, I did not expect this.
I think one fear that some students have is that they want to have notes to reference back to. They want to look back and they want to have all the information right there. What I tell people who want to do that is, for one, with the MCAT, there's so much content, you just can't take notes on that much. And also just go back to the textbook. If you're writing something down so close to the textbook, is it okay to just say, don't write it down, go reference the textbook?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in general, again, there are contexts in which I think probably taking extremely thorough notes is good as a future reference point. But when you have all the material easily accessible to you, and especially like these days, you can just search something up, or you can do like keyword searches on PDF documents or whatever. I mean, if you have an electronic textbook, like I just don't think it's a good use of your time to be rewriting all of that stuff. I mean, if you're rewriting and transforming it, and and also maybe using it as a reference later, that's one thing. But I think one thing that I think students have to recognize is that not you know in a given a given set of paragraphs or sentences, like a decent amount of that is actually trying to explain what, say, one sentence means, or a couple of sentences mean, or an equation, or a graph, or whatever. And so, really, like the content of the book. I mean, if you understood things exactly how an expert understood them, they wouldn't have to explain all this. They could say a single sentence and communicate exactly what they're trying to communicate. But because they can't do that, there's a lot of words that are being spilled to just try to explain one concept. And so your goal is not really to like have all those words at your disposal again. The goal is to just be able to pull up that concept when you need it, and have that concept be kind of connected to other things, and have it be around when it's relevant. But yeah, that's what I mean. It makes me concerned, I think, when you try to write all this stuff down, when a decent chunk of it is actually just to kind of get you to understand like the first sentence, or whatever.
Where do notes and recall blend in terms of when you're making notes, how much should be referencing, looking at things, how much should be trying to think of it without referencing? Is there a time for one and a time for other? Kind of where do these merge?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a big fan of just like never taking notes with the reference nearby, and then later on referencing things. But to be honest, I mean, I also, when I'm reading, especially like reading a technical document, I mean, I'll take notes, just like the kinds of notes that I was talking about earlier, like this is crazy, how can they say this, or like, whoa, this is a really clever research design, or like verify, like kind of like, wait, so they actually did it like this, so they did it like X, Y, and Z way, which is totally different than this other person who did it ZYX way. So I do think just almost naturally as we're reading, taking notes, notes in the margins, or like writing, you highlight and then on the PDFs make a little comment or whatever. I mean, I think that is often helpful for kind of meta commentary on what you're reading. But then I think for the kind of organization and for the benefit of memory and understanding, it can be very good to do free recall just after the fact, at some point afterwards. And then I think that's generally speaking a little more powerful, and it also it lets you glimpse what's happening after you read, which is you're going to forget some stuff, or things are like you'll realize that things don't make as much sense when you're trying to explain them to yourself and remember what happened as when you're actually reading that content. I mean, people get tripped up a lot, I think, when they're reading, where it's just like, yeah, that makes sense. Yes, of course, that's the next step. Of course. But then when they actually try to say, like, remember a procedure, then it doesn't make sense. It doesn't flow in the way that they want it to flow. And so getting that information, I think, is quite important. So it's not like I would never write, things when you're reading, but just like my primary note taking is afterwards.